Now, in addition to basically working for Ankura, I also am a SANS instructor with the SANS Institute out of the US, and I essentially teach the advanced forensics and threat hunting classes, and also the advanced network forensics classes. And that's kind of also what leads me into, I run the DFIR practice, or the Digital Forensics and Incident Response practice, out here in Asia Pac as part of Ankura's presence out here in Asia Pac as well. They have teams over in the UK and the US, and we also have a team over here, and also based out in Hong Kong as well. Now, a little bit about sort of my background and kind of where I kind of came from and how I ended up where I am here. Prior to Ankura, I was working for a big US SaaS company, a big like cloud company, which some of you will most likely use every day, I'm guessing. But I essentially worked for them, and I was a director in their incident response team as well. So I worked for them for about 4.5 years. And then prior to that, I worked in sort of the largest financial institution out here in Australia. And then prior to that, I was also working for a defense contractor. All of those roles have involved digital forensics and incident response, either leading teams or basically working with teams, or trying to develop new technology or new ways to do incident response and forensics, and to basically protect organizations. So I've definitely seen my share of everything from things in sort of government and defense through to the commercial side of the industry as well, for those kind of working in manufacturing and finance, and then all the way through to some of the work that I've recently done, where I was with a big US cloud company as well. So I've seen some interesting networks and definitely some interesting cases. And essentially today I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about sort of the landscape overall for incident response, and kind of how to prepare for that and how to be aware of that. One of the big challenges I saw through my work, whether it be consulting or working internally, even inside organizations, is just this awareness around how incidents actually work. Hopefully, most of you haven't had the chance to experience a big sort of incident or a big compromise yet, but the inevitability of it is that you will at some stage in your life, in sort of the IT world, at some point. And what I want to share with you today is a little bit to kind of help you prepare for that and be aware of that. It is a challenge to understand what to do and what to expect when those big incidents occur. And that's hopefully what you'll sort of leave today with, is a better appreciation and understanding. And unfortunately, some pretty scary statistics, but the idea around that is not to scare you, but to more empower you, or to at least give you an appreciation of what to expect, so that you kind of can better deal with that and work through those large incidents as they occur. So to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about what we call in incident response as dwell time, or what you need to understand as the amount of time that a threat actor or a malicious either organized crime or state-sponsored actor may be inside your network, and what that means to you. So what I've pulled, I've pulled sort of two slides, this one and the next one, which have a bunch of statistics around public reports that have been released. This one that you're looking at here is from the M-Trends report, which was published this year. And essentially what you're looking at along the top here is the amount of time a threat actor would be inside your network before you're able to detect it. And this is on average across a number of years. If you actually look at 2011, back almost, not quite, but almost 10 years ago, it used to take us as defenders about 416 days to detect that there was an adversary or a malicious actor inside of our networks. Kind of fast forward through to the statistics from last year, it took on average 56 days for us to detect threat actors inside our environment. So what that means is, for those 56 days, we have a malicious actor moving around the environment, orientating themselves with what's inside the environment, and potentially doing things like dropping their malicious tool sets or collecting things from your environment to essentially take out of your environment as part of what they might be after. Now, that's an important statistic to understand, the 56 days. That's an average. In some organizations, it's much higher. In some organizations, it's much shorter. But 56 days is a long time. And it's important to have an appreciation for that, because the time that you discover an incident, or that you kind of hear about an incident, or you've detected it inside of your environment or inside of your client's environment, that threat actor has likely been there for 56 days. So doing something like just taking that system offline that you've detected them on is most likely not going to have much of an impact to that threat actor, other than kind of tip them off that you know that they're inside your environment at that point. So, and at that point, you kind of have to basically kind of stop and go, all right, we've detected them on this one system. Where else have they been in this sort of average of 56 days? The other thing to understand too is that we do have a differentiation between detecting our malicious actors inside the network from our own telemetry or our own tooling or our own teams versus someone externally notifying us. And that's kind of an important thing to understand, because there's two different statistics around those. So if you have an internal team or internal telemetry, like antivirus or IDS type solutions, or if you have sort of a larger SOC, a security operations center, sort of running your internal detection, it's around an average of 141 days for you to detect them. And if you get an external notification, and this is usually from, it could be a government organization kind of notifying you that potentially you've got something malicious going on inside your environment. Could be a third party notifying you that they're seeing malicious traffic come from your environment. It's about an average of 30 days, or at least it was last year, for an external notification as well. The other statistic I've kind of given you along the bottom there is over time, how these have changed in terms of how people have found out about sort of compromises inside their environment. I've put this in here more because it's kind of an interesting statistic to see how we've shifted internally inside an organization versus people notifying us externally. So back in 2011, there was a sort of well, again, this is all averages based, but there was an average of 94% of incidents were discovered by someone externally telling you, and only 6% back in 2011 did you actually detect inside your organization. As you start to slowly move through sort of 2011 and 2012 and 2013, you'll see that over time, as organizations, as internal organizations or internal teams, we got better at actually detecting our own incidents. So you'll see that even up to sort of, where are we over here, if I get my orientation right, around sort of 2017, that in 2017, we were actually detecting more incidents from internal teams than we were from external notifications coming in. And this is an important kind of statistic at that point in time to realize, because what it kind of showed is that if you had an internal team, you're more likely to kind of catch malicious activity occurring inside of your network. Now, with 2018 and 2019 sort of moving forward, we start to see that those numbers start to drop back a little bit, which is again kind of an interesting statistic in itself, that where there could be kind of two things happening here. One, it could be that the external notifications that we're getting from government organizations or from national certs or from third parties are getting better, and that their information is becoming more useful. Or it could be that we're starting to see sort of a change in how threat actors move inside the environment, which makes them harder to actually detect as well. Now, and the other way to look at it too is, if you go back to that top graph there, you'll see that over time we're actually detecting threat actors quicker. So coming from sort of 2011, where it was sort of 416 days before we found out that they were inside our environment, that's come all the way down to 56 days. And you'll see over time that's gotten better. So there is a little bit of a good story here, and that is that we are getting better at detecting threat actors over time. So at least take that as a positive away from the statistic, even though the fact that they are inside our environment for 56 days is something that you definitely need to be aware of. And this is just from the MTrends report. The other reports which kind of pull out similar statistics, and I'll talk you through these as well as they're measured slightly differently, is the one in the top left there, the 55 with the arrow and the 86. This is taken from the TrustWave report from last year, essentially, and they're basically saying that for the average time for you to detect an external threat actor from an external source is about 86 days. So their averages are a little bit higher. The line graphs that you kind of see directly above my head here, the one right at the top is again the time between how long it takes you to detect an adversary from being inside the environment to when you actually detect them. And unfortunately, this one's kind of measured in days or less or months or less. So it's not a nice hard statistic. But it's interesting to kind of see that you'll see over time that as we've come to 2019, we're starting to get down to days or less, at least from the DBIR report where this one is pulled from. The numbers down the bottom and the graph which is directly behind my head here, the graph directly behind my head is how long from detection, how long once we know that they're inside the environment, does it take us as an organization to actually contain the incident and kind of get our hands wrapped around how far or how sort of embedded these threat actors are inside our network. And you'll see that over time, the percentages on this have gotten better in terms of days or less. So that means that what the DBIR report is kind of saying with that graph behind my head is that it takes kind of days or less once we know the threat actor is inside the environment for us to understand how far they are inside our environment. So at least it means that when we're trying to understand their spread inside our network, we're getting pretty quick at that. The 280 days is an interesting one. This is taken from the Pomon Institute, which do research. I've included their statistic because they're essentially an independent research organization, whereas the DBIR, the TrustWave one at the top and the MTrans one previously are all from vendors. I do like the Pomon one because it is research-based, and they've essentially gone out to a little over 500 organizations and asked for their statistics and curated those statistics quite well. But the number that you're seeing here, this 280 days, is how long it takes for you to actually understand how far they have spread inside your environment. So this is 280 days on average from them being inside the environment before you actually are able to contain the incident and sort of get your hands wrapped around how far they have gone through your network. This is an important statistic, unlike the 56 days previously. The 56 days on average on the previous slide is how long until you know about them being there. Whereas this 280 days is how long they get inside your environment before you actually start to contain the incident overall. So it does include some of the time there in terms of when you'd actually know that they are inside the environment. So this kind of gives you a bit of a picture around understanding how long the threat actor has been there and how long they are likely to be inside your environment. So understand, even though you detect them today or you've detected them this morning, they've been there on average for probably 56 days is what a lot of these reports are kind of telling you at the moment. And in terms of how long they'll be there in total, the Pomon Institute is saying that they'll be in your environment in total for on average 280 days as part of that. The other thing to understand as well with how threat actors move inside an environment is how long it takes a malicious actor, once they get onto one system, how long does it take them to actually pivot and move to another system? Now, what I've given you here is some detail from the CrowdStrike Global Threat Report. And I've put this in here. This is actually taken from a year ago, but they don't kind of break it out this way in their most recent report. But I've included this because this is interesting, and it's looking at a couple of different malicious actors based on the type of actor that they are or the group that they might be affiliated with. So you'll see right at the top there, the group which is listed as BEAR, which is essentially what CrowdStrike referred to as Russian-based APT threat actors or sort of those advanced threat actors. And what they're saying as part of the research that they did for the year of 2018 is that in the cases that they had worked, they could see Russian APT actors take approximately 18 minutes. Once they'd compromised or gotten onto one system, it takes them 18 minutes to get onto the second system inside your environment. And this is, I mean, this is still holds true today. The statistic is probably actually a little bit lower nowadays, particularly for Russian APT threat actors. But they are kind of sort of known to be a threat actor which moves very quickly and very efficiently inside an environment. So understand that they've probably been in your environment for 56 days, but they got to the second system inside your environment within about 18 minutes on average. Going down to the very last group that's listed there, which is SPIDER, this is what CrowdStrike referred to as basically cybercrime or financially motivated cybercrime. And I point the two of these out because the top one there in terms of BEAR being Russian targeted threat actors, that's really a state-sponsored or state-backed group of threat actors. So highly efficient, highly funded, and highly coordinated. The one down the bottom there, SPIDER, which they list as essentially financial cybercrime type work, is more of what you see with things like banking Trojan and that type of activity inside an environment. And what the research kind of showed from that year is that on average, it took sort of these cyber criminals, which were more financially motivated and not sort of backed by a state-sponsored organization, is that it took them about 9 hours to move inside an environment from the first system to their second system that they got onto. Now, that's kind of the lower end of the statistics. So essentially, you could say best case scenario, you're looking at 56 days for them to be inside the environment, and then about 9 hours for them to pivot to their second system inside your environment as well. The breakout time sort of back in 2017, I've included that as well, which is essentially the average across all groups that they saw was just under 2 hours. And it still is today in their most recent report, although it's not broken out this way. It's approximately 2 hours for most malicious actors to pivot or to get onto a second system inside of your environment. So they're kind of the statistics you need to be aware of. Now, why am I kind of giving you these statistics as trying to set you up to understand why this is important? And that's because when we do incident response inside an organization, we typically follow a framework which would look very similar to what I've thrown up here. Now, this kind of changes depending on whether you're using the NIST standard. NIST kind of combined two of these modules together. But in essence, a lot of the incident response frameworks that are used follow this model of preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. But what we often see people do is they tend to skip the containment section. Now, that's important to understand because what you're all doing today in attending the conference today and all the talks that you're going to is essentially preparation. So you are actually in the first phase of incident response right now, which is around educating yourself and kind of tooling yourself up. Identification and scoping is where we talk about understanding what systems our threat actors have compromised. And at that point, you want to understand all the systems. Now, it's not always possible to do this very quickly. This often takes, it can take hours or days, and in some cases for very large compromises, it can take a week or more. But the idea behind this is the concept of scoping is you're supposed to understand how far they have gone inside your environment. Then when we get to containment, now containment is a term that's been used for many years now in incident response. And it's something that looking back as someone who's been doing sort of incident response for well over a decade now, it's probably something that we should have called something other than containment. A lot of people kind of see the word containment and they think, oh, containment means basically taking a system offline. When in essence, that's not what the intention of containment was for incident response. The idea behind this was that third phase was supposed to be designed around intel development and intel gathering around what's going on inside your environment with that particular incident. So the idea is supposed to be that you're containing or kind of wrapping your arms around how far the threat actor has gone inside your environment. And it's very common that you kind of move between containment and identification in a continuous life cycle, because you're supposed to gather information about what the threat actor is doing and then sort of look across the rest of your network to see where else they may have been, which is part of identification. Then you might find them on 2 other systems. You might do forensics on those systems, which is then back in Intel development and containment, and then use that to find out any other systems that have the same types of indicators or the same sort of footprints or the same fingerprints of where that malicious actor has been. But unfortunately, too often we see people kind of skip that and go straight to eradication. And this is kind of the typical response of where you see a compromised system and you pull the plug for that system and you go, look, just take that system and take it offline. And unfortunately, that's the space where a lot of organizations who are kind of new to doing incident response end up, or a lot of people who are kind of inexperienced or haven't done lots of incident response kind of follow this methodology of going, if the malicious actor is on this system, let's just take it offline, and so they're no longer there. Remember, the reality is if you found them today, they've likely been there for 56 days on average. So just pulling the plug on that one system loses all of the evidence and all of the intel about that threat actor inside your environment that you need to finish off the scoping phase as part of it. So make sure if you take one thing away from my talk today, please make sure you don't just sort of pull the plug off a system and then kind of say, all right, incident over at that point, because I guarantee you the threat actor is far further inside your environment than that one system. And you've just kind of removed a lot of the evidence at that point that you can use to then track what they actually might be doing. The other things to understand too, which I thought might help a lot of this group, is a few statistics around sort of how you could prepare for this, or how you can use some hard statistics around doing risk assessments, or sort of discussing this in sort of boardrooms or with other sort of C-suite level executives. Now, the stats that I've kind of got up here, again, from the Pomon Institute, from their most recent report this year, which is it's actually a really good report around the cost of a data breach. And I've just pulled out some of the interesting statistics which might help a lot of people. The idea behind this is, again, they did a lot of research on incidents that had occurred in the last year, and they spoke to a little over 500 organizations and took information around those. Now, on average, the total cost of a data breach inside an organization is about $3.8 million. That included things like lost time, in terms of sort of lost productivity of a business. It included additional staff time. It included consulting time and recovery time, which would not normally be part of normal business operations. So you'll see that, and this is the average. This is not sort of the upper limit. The upper limit was actually much greater than this, but this is the average cost of a breach, not of over a year. This is of a single breach that they saw over these sort of 500 organizations. The other thing too that they managed to do was they managed to put an average cost on a PII record, or a personal identifiable information record. So the idea behind this is how much per each record that they had that was lost, how much was that cost overall? Now, I kind of like this statistic because it works really well if you're trying to do assessment of risk or financial risk, where you might hold a large amount of PII data. And this kind of helps to kind of go, all right, if we lost sort of the 10,000 records that we have for PII data, you can then start to extrapolate out the cost of those to kind of do financial-based risk assessments. So they're essentially saying that if you were to lose one of those PII records, it's going to cost you about $150 per PII record that you lose as part of an incident. The other nice one that they had in here was the average cost saving when you already had an incident response team or a plan and you had tested or exercised that plan with your organization. That the average cost per case was about $2 million. So this kind of showed, and the upper limit, again, of what they sort of saw was sort of around the $5 and $6 million mark. But they're essentially saying that per sort of breach that you might have, that you actually save about $2 million if you've already got an incident response team, or you've already tested and exercised those incident response plans as well. So again, this ends up as this sort of nice cost analysis around the cost of having either an incident response team internally, or spending time and sort of setting up your incident response plans and how you would exercise those, whether it be with an internal team or external consultants that might come and help you. But the idea being that you could save around $2 million overall if you have an incident as part of it. The other interesting one is the most targeted type of data inside an organization was customer-based PII for those organizations. And this was 80% of cases. Essentially, threat actors went after customer PII. They do break down the other ones, and I didn't pull those out because they were much lower numbers here. But essentially, things like employee personal identifiable information or intellectual property had much lower percentages on them in terms of the data that was stolen. But they were saying that about 80% of the cases that they researched last year, 80% of those had customer PII stolen. So if you hold customer PII information, you need to be very aware that that is a hot target item for threat actors if they get inside your environment, or more realistically, when they get inside of your environment. The other thing at the moment, the kind of thing that we're seeing in the media a lot is things around ransomware. So I pulled some interesting sort of, again, statistics around ransomware to kind of help you prepare and kind of plan for that. This is taken from Coveware's Q2 report that they did this year in the last quarter. They're an interesting organization. They have quite a lot of useful statistics on ransomware and ransomware marketplaces. But in the work that they did in just Q2 for this year, they saw that the average time, or the average outage time for organizations that were impacted by ransomware was an average of 16 days. This basically means that organization was not operational for 16 days. And you can start to see here that this is where that sort of large $3.8 million per breach kind of comes into play here. Because if you're offline for 16 days, the quantity you could be paying in salaries or lost revenue starts to stack up pretty quickly. At the moment, the average ransom payment for that's been asked for by the ransomware groups is a little over $170,000, and this is US dollars. Same with the numbers I had up earlier. So that's kind of the average ransomware payment. Take that and use it as you would if you want to sort of self-insure or work with insurers around that, or think about how that might work. But that's kind of the average payment that they're seeing at the moment that's being requested, at least in the last quarter, by ransomware groups. All right, now the kind of scarier one is that they're seeing on average that about 22% of victims are having their data exfiltrated as part of ransomware cases. And this is kind of the stuff that's making the media and the news at the moment, where unfortunately victims not only have their systems all kind of locked up and ransomed and asked to be paid for a key to unlock them, but also the ransomware groups, or at least in 22% of the cases, they're actually exfilling and taking data out of your organization and then threatening to post that publicly online unless you pay the ransom. And it's not uncommon. I mean, this is kind of a natural progression that we've sort of seen the ransomware groups kind of make. And this is because most organizations have wised up to being attacked by ransomware. So they become very good at doing backups and holding that information. And so the ransomware groups now have kind of realized that they weren't making much money out of doing that, because people tend to have good backup solutions now that all the ransomware is becoming quite a common thing. So the ransomware groups are starting to do things like take data out of your organization and then essentially threaten to post it publicly online for other people to see unless you pay the ransom. That's kind of their second step around trying to basically get money out of you as part of that. So about 22% of victims had data taken. The other one, which is another kind of interesting statistic, which is a little bit dangerous, but I kind of thought it was worth putting up here, is that the ransomware groups that had threatened to release data that they had stolen applied to about 30% of the cases that they saw. Now, there is a difference here. So that 30% of them, the people who were victims, essentially had a threat that they were going to release data that had been stolen, but only in 22% of the cases had data actually been taken out of the organization. So this means that a couple of the ransomware groups are threatening to basically release data, but don't actually have any data of yours. Now, this might be a little bit of a dangerous game to play if you kind of think that you might be sitting inside of the 7% of people who didn't actually have any data taken, but you've just been threatened with it. But it was an interesting statistic to kind of see that the groups were starting to threaten that they'd taken data, even though only in 22% of the cases had data actually been taken outside of the organization. Now, it's not all bad news. It's worth me kind of giving you some takeaways to understand. One of the interesting ones that came out of the DBIR report is this kind of statistic, which is around how many steps a threat actor takes to actually compromise a system or compromise an organization. Now, this is kind of interesting. So and by number of steps, it means how many tasks are they willing to do to actually try to get into your organization or try to break into your organization. And what you see here is that after sort of 5 steps or 5 tasks that they might try and do, the numbers of incidents drop down significantly. So essentially, if you start to put up roadblocks to make it harder for threat actors to get into your organization and kind of make it harder than 5 steps for them to get in, the likelihood of them kind of breaking into your organization starts to drop significantly. So that was kind of an interesting stat that I pulled out. If you kind of haven't thought too much about security or securing your organization, and it's only going to take a couple of steps for them to get in, and that could be things like a phishing email with a malicious document and someone double clicking, which is kind of 3 steps. That's then you kind of are a prime target. But if things get harder for the threat actor, you tend to start to fall into the lower majority here in terms of whether you would actually be a target or be a victim at that point. So the nice thing to understand is that make it harder for the bad guys to get in, and often it significantly increases your chances. And we have statistics which kind of show that if it's kind of harder than 5 steps, they tend not to sort of spend too much time. The other thing to be aware of, though, is if a targeted threat actor, like a state-sponsored threat actor, is kind of going after your organization, the 5 steps don't really apply too much. If you're being targeted by a state-sponsored threat actor, the chances of them getting in are extremely high. Actually, it's not even relatively high; it's extremely high at that point, and that's why you still see a number of cases still exist out in sort of 20 steps and 30 steps for them to get inside your environment. The other thing to understand too is to kind of arm yourself and your team with knowledge around what's going on. Now, I've talked about a couple of different reports. The other ones that I do like as well are the ones that are released by SANS. And the reason I kind of mention those is they survey a large number of organizations and then write about what organizations are doing today inside their environment and give a bit of and give a couple of examples around how to alter what you might be doing inside your environment, or how to sort of change that to increase your sort of how protected your organization might be. So take a look at those. They're quite good. Again, they hold lots of statistics, and I do like them because they survey a very, very wide and global variety of organizations as part of what they do. The last thing is a takeaway, kind of the 4 things that you should understand is that you should plan for an incident. It's not really anymore a matter of if, but more when that you will be a victim. So make sure that you have some sort of plan in place, or you've considered that. Not only that, the statistics show us that it will save money for you to kind of go down that path and plan for it ahead of time. Understand where your critical information is. If you hold customer PII, that is a hot item for criminals to steal at the moment. So understand where that is, and then start to consider protecting that information, or at least monitoring if someone's maliciously accessing that information if you can't protect it. Understand that malicious actors will react to basically anything you sort of throw at them. So if you pull the plug on that first system that you find out about, the bad guys inside your environment will realize that you're kind of onto them, and they will act accordingly based on that. They might go quiet for a while. They might kind of speed up the operations that they might be doing internally, but understand that they will definitely react to whatever you do inside an organization. And the last one is arm your defenders or your security people inside the organization with knowledge more so than tools. It surprises me still going into organizations and helping them sort of have lots of amazing tools, when the reality is it's actually knowledge that's going to protect you better inside an organization. So try to sort of educate and follow things like research and what's going on inside the organizations globally, more so than sort of just buying the new kind of shiny tool that's available, because the knowledge will save you. And applying the tool with useful knowledge is much better for you than just having a tool that you may not know what to do at that point. Now, with that, I'm close to out of time, so I'm going to turn over to any questions people might have. So if you want to post those in, I think I can pull up the Q&A box and kind of see them come in. So any questions you have that you kind of want me to openly answer here, I'm more than happy to. Also, if you've got any questions or follow-up things that you'd like to ask that you'd rather me not sort of say on a recorded presentation, also more than happy for you to reach out to me afterwards and kind of chat to me either via email or social media as well, in a direct chat also.